heat of fury in his blood. There had been a subtle change in his blood. The massive man. It was only natural. His kind and the children of dragons have never gotten along. It was an almost animal-like instinct, and Theopalu himself felt that long-forgotten rage fill him at the mere sight of the Outworlder. Only his millennia's long life of discipline had managed to keep it hidden and in check, but he hated Hoplite with every fiber of his being. It was something he was almost glad for. Theopalu had barely felt anything for thousands of years, so to feel something so strongly again, it made him borderline joyous. But only borderline. The hate he felt for Hoplite kept it from crossing the threshold into happiness, but still this was preferable to nothing, he admitted to himself. The Outworlder had done nothing to slight him, nor was he an old enemy from ages past, meaning that he could only be the child of a dragon, or that he possessed the blood of one. A slew of intrusive thoughts began to permeate his mind, plotting on the best way to kill Hoplite before he could grow to be a real threat. He dismissed these thoughts and buried them, unwanting and unwilling to commit to any of them. He had no real interest in ending the Outworlder's life. It was merely his instincts that desired it, but not Theopalu himself. He would ignore them. He eased into a slouch before coming to sit cross-legged, his eyes heavy despite his ravenous hunger. Thankfully, no one had questioned him too much on why he had to consume so much food in a day. If they found out, they'd surely boot him from their little party. Well, maybe they would anyway. They could not afford to be rid of him quite yet, as they would surely die in the Fiendwood without his guidance. Even if they bore divine blood as he suspected, these young Pillarborn could not withstand the terrors of Kazan's realm alone, not yet. Theopalu rubbed at tired eyes, yawning as everyone began chattering. Talking took up so much effort, yet everyone seemed to be eager to waste their energy on yapping. They should be getting as much sleep as they can. It did not take long for Theopalu to fall into a semi-slumber. Even if he was an elf, having a body this old meant that he needed quite a bit of rest. Could it be time for a switch? Maybe. That would likely happen quite a few times in the days to come. And no doubt this party would have questions from him that he would not wish to answer. Soon, the chattering voices of his young companions faded into incomprehensible jargon before he heard nothing at all. That night, he dreamt of a gigantic crimson octopus floating in a black void. White pinpricks surrounded the creature, stretching out in their multitudes like grains of sand. In this void, the octopus seemed to travel for eternity, clearly lost as it wandered the infinite blackness, using the white pinpricks to guide its way. Eventually, the octopus found a blue and green sphere, its tendrils reaching out toward it to grasp it with a desperate tightness. And it never let go. Chapter 6. A Tool. Nothing more. 37. 25 shouted, barely dodging his massive fist. It was all a lie. We're not serving the pinnacle of man. You aren't serving as you should. Hoplite said coldly, a broken tool is useless. If I can't bring you back for re-indoctrination, then I will neutralize you. It was unfortunate that he'd been disarmed. 25 had always been proficient at taking an enemy's weapon from them. Yet only in that did 25 have an advantage. 37 was superior at CQC, the best among all the hoplites. 25 didn't stand a chance. He would either kill or subdue the rogue hoplite and return him, alive or dead, to the 8th arm. Their surroundings were dark, the lights having been disabled when a stray round had punched through this bunker's generator. The only reason the two super soldiers were unaffected was their matching golden eyes, each pair set behind thick, one-sided visors. They allowed them to see in near-pitch darkness, even without the night vision capabilities of their helmets. "Jin isn't a human," 25 shouted. "He's some kind of extraterrestrial, not a man." Anger flared at this outrageous claim, and his fists became a flurry, impossible to see with the naked eye. 25 only barely managed to keep on the defensive, backing away and blocking whatever he could manage. "Humans don't live forever, 37. 25 shouted. "You know they don't, no matter what." "We will." Hoplite shouted back, throwing out a right jab. "Our lore doesn't age as standard humans, just like the hoplites. We were only made a couple centuries ago. Jin showed up 2,000 years ago. Humans didn't have the tech for longevity then," he replied as he batted away the jab. A massive armor-plated boot then crashed into 25's chest plate, knocking the faulty hoplite to his back with a groan of pain. His mind worked as it pondered the words. He tried to dismiss them, to write them off as foolish babble so he could finish his objective. But he hesitated. 2,000 years ago. A human living 2,000 years from that era. He grit his teeth as he stomped over to his former comrade, a massive gauntlet wrapping around 25's helmet before he ripped it off. Familiar golden eyes stared up into 37's helmet, and oddly, he smiled. "You hesitated," 25 stated, his short black hair and tan skin drenched with sweat. "You gave it some thought just then, didn't you?" "Shut your mouth," Hoplite growled. 25, you are under arrest by order of Piss with your orders." 25 spat. "And my name isn't 25. It's he, an open-palmed slap, powerful enough to kill a normal man." "Shut 25's mouth." Spots of orange glowing blood spurting from his mouth. He needed to rein in his temper, and not let this traitor aggravate him. If Hoplite pushed 25 into going Wendigo, he'd have no choice but to neutralize him. "Please," 25 pleaded, "just listen to me, Jason." Hoplite's eyes quickly shot open, and he sat up immediately, already wide awake. That day's events replaying itself in his dreams had set him into fight or flight. Lance jumped at his sudden motion, putting a hand to her chest before letting out a sigh. "Can't wake up like a normal person, can you?" she asked with a shake of her head. Nearly made my heart explode. She was sitting down, right in between him and a snoozing Michael atop a bedroll. She hadn't needed to sleep, of course, being what she was. He wondered why she had even bothered unpacking her sleeping gear. It hadn't been necessary to do so. Then again, it was likely that she hadn't wanted to sit on the cold, hard stone all night. He himself hadn't bothered with his own oversized blanket, instead opting to sleep inside his armor in case of an attack from the fiends. With the armor regulating the internal temperature, there was no need for warmth, and despite its looks, the phalanx suit was far from uncomfortable. "I'm not normal," he replied, standing from the cool stone. He needed to get his mind off the dream. Sleep had come fairly easily last night, after investigating the 3 strange grooves in the rest stop. As it turned out, each one possessed a deep hole that was seemingly drilled down its center, each almost as wide as a manhole. 2 of them had a strange suction to them, a light tugging that gently pulled out the air around it. He had thought that perhaps they could have been used for fire pits, being able to pull out the smoke from the bottom and disperse it elsewhere. Yet, he found this idea flawed. Wouldn't any fire that got started be sucked down into the hole before it could properly spread? If the fire was large enough, it might have been okay. But the initial flame would not likely be able to last long enough for that to happen. Maybe that was what the third hole could be used for, but that one lacked any kind of suction. It was simply a hole, either not functioning as it should or intended for something different. Indeed, it was used for something very different when some of the party inevitably needed to dispose of waste. Now that he thought of it, that could have been the third groove's intended purpose. Hoplite? Lance asked. He looked to her. I was thinking of holes, he replied calmly as he adjusted his sheath. Lance's eyes knit together and she gave him this strange, confused look. Are you joking? She asked. Hoplite blinked before replying flatly. No. She should know by now that he never joked. Everyone else is asleep. He observed, head tilting to the prone forms laying flat in their bedrolls. The hard stone was likely not the most comfortable of places to rest, even with the added cushion of their bedrolls. Yet they snored on, almost as if they had been drugged. Twindle, in particular, looked almost comatose. He had heard her complaining about a lack of sleep earlier. Perhaps yesterday's trip had tired her out more than he thought. Yet, that was irrelevant right now. The squad needed to get up so they could hurry across the bridge, and the earlier they started, the better. He checked his HUD's clock, seeing that it was around 300, and they had all fallen asleep approximately 4 hours ago. Surely that was more than enough rest to get them all going. He moved towards Michael, but Lance raised a hand, shaking her head. I know what you're thinking, she told him with a small huff. And I know you're in a hurry, but they aren't like you. They need more rest than this. Hoplite stared at her for a long moment before he said, You can read my thoughts? Didn't she need eye contact for that? No. She didn't actually know what he was thinking. Lance had merely made a guess based on how well she knew Hoplite. Had they really been together for that long that she could assume his next course of action? It had only been days, really, but they had practically spent every waking moment in each other's company since his landing. He opened his mouth to clarify that she wasn't actually a mind reader, but it was too late. She gave a quiet giggle. Don't be silly, she told him with another shake of her head. I just guessed. He knew that, but now she thought that he believed her capable of it. For some reason, this mildly irritated him. He did not like the thought of Lance considering him as silly. He was serious. He looked back down at Michael, who occasionally muttered incoherently in his sleep. Hoplite had to keep his flashlight enabled for the Marine until he had finally fallen unconscious, the fear of the dark still being fresh in his mind. He found himself wishing that Michael would get over it already, but he understood that the trauma Michael went through wouldn't simply go away. He was only human. The more time we waste, Hoplite whispered, the more provisions we lose, and the longer my comrades are in danger. They all still need to sleep. It's way too early for them to get back in that wooden death box. She insisted, pointing a thumb back towards the entrance. The wagon stood there, with Baumil's looming shadow barely visible behind it. No fiends must have come this way, then, for if Baumil had entered combat, then Hoplite would have been the first one to awaken. Those mutants really did have only one goal: to reach the Fiend Wall. They were completely disinterested in checking these old rest stops for victims to soothe their pains. Considering how much rest this squad would apparently need, that was a good thing. The pace would be even slower if no one could sleep. If only they were all elves like Lance. Only needing around 2 hours of sleep in a week would be incredibly useful in an operation like this. Twindle was apparently half-elf, so she still needed more rest than one of full blood. But Theopalu had no excuse. The Watcher was constantly napping when he wasn't eating. He may have been old, but that shouldn't have increased his need to rest by such a large margin. From what Hoplite could see, Theopalu was still fit, and Lance herself had confirmed that he was one of the best Watchers the Feywood had to offer. Seeing the ancient elf curled up snoring in a ball made that hard to believe. His putrid face irritated Hoplite the longer he continued to stare at it. A strange urge filled him then, nearly driving him to charge over to Theopalu to stomp his head into paste. Discipline reigned in this unwarranted hatred, and he turned his attention forcefully away from the elf's prone form. It couldn't be Kazon's influence, not after the ritual Twindle had performed last night to protect everyone's minds. Was Hoplite too far away from the paladin for her ritual to take effect? Twindle had told them all to stay within 200 paces of her, if it could be helped, letting out an aura that forcefully dulled negative emotions such as anger. Then again, she had also clarified that it simply dulled negative emotions, not erased them completely. There had still been minor squabbles between party members before it had been time to rest. Perhaps Kazon's influence and Twindle's magic simply cancelled each other out. How far away did Kazon have to be for his magic to affect them? Surely greater than Twindle's 200 paces. But what if he was only slightly further away than that? What if he was following them, staying just out of sight? He pondered this for a split second before he dismissed the idea. Hoplite hadn't seen anything that had been following them for the journey thus far. So unless Kazon could make himself invisible, it wasn't likely yet. He knew now that such things were not impossible on Akulis. He could be wearing a cloak like that of the Day Watchers, something that shifted to match the colors of one's environment. It wasn't too difficult for him to spot such concealment.